CNN News18's managing editor Zaka Jacob spoke to former foreign policy advisor to Justin Trudeau, Omer Aziz, on the diplomatic ties with Canada. Listen into that conversation.
You had recently written a piece for the Globe and Mail where you basically said on this Khalistan question, India and Canada were not talking to each other; they were rather talking past each other. From your experience as a foreign policy advisor to Mr. Trudeau, could you explain to us, maybe give us an anecdote or two, why you felt that particularly on this issue, the Khalistan issue, both sides were talking past each other?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I served in government in 2017 as a foreign policy advisor. It was a very critical time because Donald Trump had just come into office. Prime Minister Modi had now been in office for 3 years. Prime Minister Trudeau had been in office for 2 years. It was a very critical time of global affairs where a number of the issues that we're seeing today, especially between India and Canada, could have been resolved or put on a better course. You know, this is what the purpose of diplomacy is. It is to keep talking. It is to seek out mutual interests and where we can work together. And then where there are challenges, we address those together domestically with our allies. And if we're invested in a bilateral relationship with the country, then we take their issues at least into consideration. An example that might show how they were talking past each other, it was just very difficult for the two foreign ministers to meet in that year in 2017. I remember it was quite difficult. So from where I sat, I had to advocate for the agenda and the issue and for the attention, time, space that, you know, policymakers and principals should have applied to this. But what was worrying was that even where there were attempts when the Indian government did want to talk or the Indian foreign minister did want to talk, I often felt that we either didn't want to listen or we didn't have time to listen. And so that's a function of a lack of priorities, because I saw India as a rising power and that they were bringing this issue to our concern. And so it was worth addressing very seriously. Where we've gotten to now is a near rupture in relations. This is what happens when you don't have investment or interest in a country's bilateral relationship, where it's superficial. And what I'm hoping for is what I'm hoping for then, which is that diplomacy can prevail and not just, hard politics and tough talk.
Now, India has been saying, and even before Mr. Trudeau came out with these allegations, India has been saying that Hardeep Nijjar was a Khalistani, he was a separatist, he was a terrorist, he was wanted for a number of crimes here in India. There was an Interpol red corner notice against him, and Canada seemingly did not do much to try and bring him to justice for all of these crimes. The question then is, why would the government of Canada, and the Prime Minister in particular, by going public, why would they go to such great lengths to eulogize such a person, even to the extent of harming and hurting the diplomatic relationship?
Yeah, I mean, if the reporting is accurate, he was also a Canadian citizen, right? And hadn't been convicted of any terrorism laws that I'm aware of here in Canada. And so if the allegation was true, and we have no reason to doubt that it is, just given that now the reporting suggests that there were human intelligence, signals intelligence, and that the US may have provided the key intelligence to implicate agents of the Indian government, Indian security services in particular. So, I mean, the intelligence is there, and he's a sitting prime minister of a democratically elected prime minister of Canada. Could he have given someone else to announce this? Could this have been discussed privately, perhaps at the G20 and elsewhere? Sure. But I think the political calculation that was made, and perhaps the national security calculation as well, was that the prime minister has to get ahead of this and address this. Also, it was already being leaked that this has occurred and this issue is behind the scenes. And, you know, with democracies, it's very difficult to keep information just close and away from the people often. So it was going to get out anyways. And I think Prime Minister wanted to be ahead of it and wanted to address it head on because it raises some very, very serious implications and consequences. I can't speak to Mr. Nijjar himself. I mean, there's been conflicting accounts of his background. I just want to say that, number one, to the extent that someone's just expressing themselves and it's just free speech, that is entirely protected and guaranteed within Canada's constitution. And no prime minister would dare challenge that essential principle. It's just part of the culture. But where things get dangerous or where they could potentially get into tricky territory is if there's any kind of fundraising or if that speech turns into donations and those donations are going towards what another country may consider illicit or illegal activity.